How can you avoid Amazon? Which music streaming service is the most privacy respecting? How do we balance our privacy lifestyle with our general growth in life? And many, many more questions. Again, we missed a week last week, so there's quite a few questions to catch up on. Welcome to the Q&A for Surveillance Report 234, where we are answering questions from our amazing patrons who keep this podcast going and support our work. If you would like to ask a question or support the podcast or both, you can do that at patreon.com/surveillancepod or xmrchat.com/surveillancepod, all down in the description. So our highlight question this week is going to come from Oddbite, who asked a number of questions, but we're going to start with the question, as a person in the US, how do you avoid Amazon? I would love to move away, but there doesn't seem to be any alternatives. This is a really good question because I think in my experience, I run into a lot of people who agree that Amazon is maybe not the best company, to put it lightly, for any number of reasons. Actually, over at The New Oil, every Prime Day or Prime Week, I put out a blog reminding you why Amazon is terrible, no matter what end of the political spectrum you fall on. But a lot of people still feel like they have no choice to use Amazon. So in answer to this question, my first thought would be, in what way do you feel like there are not any alternatives? Because in my experience, nearly every single thing that's on Amazon, you can go find somewhere else. So if I want a book, I can go to, there's big bookstore chains like Barnes & Noble, but you're kind of just trading one devil for another in that case. But there's like half price books, there's used bookstores, there's small bookstores in your area. There's probably a ton of them. You can jump online and do a web search for independent bookstores in my area. I think there's what's the website? IndieBound, that'll show you different bookstores that are independent in your area.
Libraries.
I've been hearing a lot of people talk about Audible lately. Maybe it's because I'm not one who usually rereads books. There's a few books that I'll reread, or I'll reread them once a year, but the library has the audiobook for free. And sure, I might have to wait a few weeks for it to come off of hold, but it's free. And the author is still getting paid because they get a small, probably not as much as if you buy the book, admittedly, but they do get a royalty every time you borrow a book from the library, whether that's physical or Audible.
And you can do it with ebooks as well.
Yeah, you can do ebooks, you can do physical books, you can do magazines. A lot of libraries even have CDs, movies. The libraries are really underrated these days. As far as physical goods, a lot of the time, and again, I know there's really good arguments to be made for you're just trading it for a lesser evil. If I need clothes, I can go to Target. And granted, especially depending on your political beliefs, Target is really not doing that great these days. But I would argue they're less evil than Amazon. The thing is, there's a lot of independent stores for this stuff. There's thrift stores. And then it really depends on what you're trying to buy. If you're trying to buy a pocket knife, you could check their website and see if they sell directly. In my opinion, I feel like there's plenty of other stores. I will say the two caveats I will give, and I say this all the time, is there is nuance in the world. I know the internet doesn't want you to believe that, but I understand that sometimes there are certain things you can only get on Amazon, or it's twice as much to get it somewhere else. So in those cases, I would say it's probably okay to just bite the bullet and buy it on Amazon because you don't really have a reasonable choice. But I think more often than not, I would start with the manufacturer's website. Again, it really depends on what we're talking about here, but go straight to their website, try to figure out, where can I buy this thing? Do they have a store directly? Do they sell in local stores? Stuff like that. And then go from there. The other thing I do want to point out, Henry made this point one time when we covered a story, is I think there is a good argument to be made for not handing out your information across a million different websites. In a lot of ways, it might be safer to just have one or two, from a security perspective, to just have one or two websites where you do the bulk of your shopping, because then that's less places to have a data breach. But at the same time, I think if you're doing a thing like using alias email, using a PO box, using a privacy.com card, I think that really cuts down on that risk a lot. And in my opinion, it's still totally worth it to avoid giving my money to someone like Amazon. I really want to stress, I understand that we're playing different degrees of evil here, but there's things like eBay, there's things like Etsy, there's plenty of other online stores where you can go that at very least, you're not sending as much money to Amazon. And it also depends on where you are. I'm fortunate enough to live near a big city where I can throw a rock and hit almost any kind of store. If you live in a town of 1,000 people, then yeah, you may not have an independent bookstore you can buy from. You may not have 3 different clothing stores you can go to. For most people who live in a more urban area, I think you have a lot more options than you realize. You just need to start with the manufacturer's website, see what options they have, see what other e-commerce websites are out there, see what other physical stores are in your area. I would recommend starting there. I forgot to get my fan, so I'm going to get that while you're talking.
Yeah, the only thing I'll really add to that is analyze your purchase history. Actually go and see what you've purchased on Amazon, and then use that as a starting point for looking for alternatives. And I think the main thing, honestly, and that I would pursue, and I think is the biggest mover of the needle, it's not people who just shop on Amazon once every few months and buy just this random item. It's if you're an Amazon addict, where you literally shop on Amazon every day of your life and you're like, you're in Amazon Prime, but you don't need to be this extreme about it. Like if you're someone all in on the Amazon ecosystem, you can actually still pull out a lot of things from the ecosystem and still get kind of your basics from there. And that's still a big improvement in the right direction. But it's also worth asking why you're doing any of this, right? There's a lot of concerns. Like in our community, it might come from a privacy/big tech perspective and not wanting to support these big tech companies. For a lot of people, they don't agree with Bezos, whether because he's a billionaire or because of his political opinions or because of Amazon's crappy business practices and pretty much trying to like screw over small businesses. Like there's so many different things that could be going on here. Typically, I will actually use Amazon as a search engine. And like almost every product that you find on Amazon, you can also order from their own webpage. And sometimes it's cheaper on their webpage. So that's typically what I do. It was pretty sad though. I mean, I was trying to find the email while Nate was talking because I forgot what service it was. But one of the services I was buying from just sent out an email a few weeks ago saying, oh, we're shutting down our web store. You can only buy us on Amazon now. And I thought that was a little bit sad. So you might be in situations like that, and that's okay. You're doing the best you can. And once I went on this like bike ride, it wasn't like the craziest long bike ride. It was only like 30K. So like pretty short for like a road ride. But like I wanted to get food halfway near a park and the only option was a Whole Foods. And you know what? It was pretty good, man. I'm not gonna lie. But you're still supporting Amazon when you go to Whole Foods. Amazon's more than just Amazon. So like really think about that as well. If you're giving money to Twitch streamers, like you're still kind of using Amazon. So just know it's a big, tall order to fully avoid Amazon. And I think just avoiding it as much as you can is a good goal for especially people who are using it a lot.
I think just to really drill home the point, what you said at the start is really my main thing. Is there's so many people that like the minute they need anything, straight to Amazon. Like it's like a reflex that they don't even think about. They just, and I mean, there's even that joke, like we've seen memes online of people just like, oh, a Furby just showed up at my door because apparently I got blackout drunk and one click ordered on Amazon, and that's cool. And like, it's funny, but at the same time, it's like, why? Like, why do you need the Amazon app on your phone? Like, I've even heard people talk about, like, that's just what they do when they're bored. Instead of doom scrolling, they scroll on Amazon and buy things. And first of all, it must be nice to have that much money. But second, it's like, why? Like, why is that just your habit? Like, when I was growing up, before the days of the internet, people would come home, turn off their brain and watch TV all night. And now people come home, turn off their brain and doom scroll and buy on Amazon to make themselves feel better. And it's like, just that, like asking yourself, like, have I checked other websites? And maybe you're right. I've seen that too, where it's like I go to the official website of the product and they're like, you can buy this on Amazon. And that's the only place we officially support. But just to double check, because I've seen that too, where I go to their official website and it's like, oh, dude, it's like $10 cheaper here. That's awesome. Or that's kind of the thing with anything in the privacy is that Henry and I preach is like, just ask yourself why you're doing it. If you're using Google or Amazon or Apple because it fits a very specific need that you have not been able to replicate anywhere else, fair enough. But if you're just doing it because that's the way you've always done it and that's what everyone else does, it's a good time to pause and look around and see if there's other options.
We're going to try to maybe like get closer to rapid responses to the rest of Oddbite's questions because we want to make sure we leave time for other questions as well. So Oddbite asked, what are some apps you feel do not have any good privacy alternative? I still think Maps is something that we really need to see. I know there's OpenStreetMaps. I know we're going to get comments that there's OpenStreetMaps, but I don't think anyone
Maps
in their
with traffic specifically.
Yeah, no one in their right mind is going to say Google Maps equals OpenStreetMaps. And so I would really like to see more of like a proper Google Maps alternative that someone can use, and it would be like exactly the same experience and usability that Google Maps lets people have.
I think there's a lot of answers. I think there's small ones. Like I still haven't found a really good user. I think user friendliness is the main thing, like Henry pointed out, because there's a lot of apps out there that like, oh, technically it does this thing, but either you have to like compile it or it's like Linux only, or like it's really kind of awkward to set up and get using. And like once it's set up, it's fine. But like that initial setup is really rough. I'm thinking of Joplin specifically. So, I mean, there's things like to-do apps. There's things like, yeah, maps are really, like I said, they're missing navigation, which I think is the big one. Because like, okay, that's cool that a map can tell me how to get from here to the other side of town. But if it's not going to tell me that there's a 40-minute traffic jam on the way and take me around it, it's not really usable for most people. I think something I'd like to see more of are voice over IP and payment apps. Like I would love to see more alternatives to privacy.com, which I know I've said before, there's a lot of regulatory issues there. Same thing with voice over IP. It's really expensive to maintain, but a lot of voice over IP, it's pretty much like JMP, MySudo, Hushed is okay. And then everything else is like Google Voice and like all these things that aren't really privacy friendly. But Yeah, I think that's the main thing is just, again, a lot of them need a much better user interface for onboarding users. I feel like that's the big challenge for a lot of these apps. You said, do you see any privacy focused front ends implement something like YouTube Premium's video download feature? Do you think that's something that's even feasible? I use Tubular and I've never tried it, but I think Tubular does have the ability to download videos from YouTube so I can watch them offline.
Yeah, NewPipe does this as well.
I'm not sure what OS you're talking about or if there's like something specific about the way YouTube Premium does it, but yeah, I think some apps already do that to my knowledge. So feel free to write in again and like clarify what you mean, but some apps already do this, I think.
Next question, also from Oddbite. One of my parents once said that the easiest way to get an adult to change their ways is to get a time machine and change them while they were a teenager. Their logic is that the older an adult is, the more set in their ways they are, and the less likely they are to want to try something new. What do you guys think of this view? And why aren't there any privacy-focused channels that target children and teens? I feel like targeting those age groups would be a lot easier, considering that you can feed off their already rebellious nature and get them to make a net positive change. I'll start by saying I started my own channel when I was a teen and a minor. So I don't think, at least on the Techlore side of things, it's not for children or teens, right? Like mature people who want to dive into these topics should have the resources to do it, because I don't think that teens are any less capable of understanding what we talk about than grandma who tunes in. The idea is the things we talk about and the stories that we cover should be accessible to those people as well. And if we're not doing that, then leave us feedback on how we can be better, because that's really the goal. The goal is the content should be for everybody. Yeah, I guess teens are more, perhaps impressionable based on research I've seen. Does that mean that we need to go actively target them? I don't know. That's a complicated question. The way I look at it is I try to see what's most needed in the broad community, and I try to make content that is the most useful at any given time to make my point come across and give valuable resources. I've never been super interested in demographics personally, is probably the best way to say it. And we also just don't have that much insight into our demographics outside of what YouTube tells us. And YouTube doesn't even really report figures for people under 18 to creators, as far as I can tell. I think it might say it, but it seems highly inaccurate as far as I can tell. It's a tricky topic. And actually, as creators, one last thing I'll say, we actually have to toggle each video whether or not the video is designed for children or not. And if you say yes to that question, it's completely different in terms of the standards you're held to, in terms of whether or not advertising can run in that video. So it's actually a somewhat of a binary thing of whether or not you're making child-only content versus content for everybody. So that's kind of the last thing I'll say that's kind of a behind-the-scenes creator thing that kind of we have to think about.
Yeah, I'm with Henry. I would love to make more content for a younger audience, because I think Henry hit the nail on the head. I really do think adults tend to undersell how intelligent kids can be. And I think kids are capable of understanding privacy and political issues. I think it's a balance, because on the one hand, you could go all in on the brain rot and the meme speak and the flashy catch it. The New Oil gets that a lot. Is oh, you're too wordy. And it's yes, but I can only dumb this stuff down so much before I start getting diminishing returns. And it's almost like the Nigerian prince thing. I'm weeding out the people who are going to take one. I've seen these people that I type one paragraph on Discord and they're oh my God, wall of text. And it's okay, clearly you don't have the attention span to have the kind of conversation I'm looking for. And I sound like a dick, but it's true in that case. If people come to our channel looking for brain rot and memes, we can only do so much to cater to that audience. I think there is a balance between the two. There's a challenge between delivering good quality information, but also making it entertaining and not dry. But even then, there's some channels that are doing really well where it's just somebody turns on their phone and talks for a half an hour.
I honestly think it's just not what the content we want to do. Because I do see someone being hyper entertaining, and I've seen some TikToks that just happen to be privacy related about someone who's it's just a 45-second outrage style TikTok.
I could do that. Yeah.
I just don't want to do that content, but I actually do think it's needed because it does resonate with the current younger generation. It's just not who I am, and it would be very out of my comfort zone to make TikToks just screaming at the phone with a white wall behind me. Who am I talking to?
Same here. And that's the other thing I was going to say, is just to kind of wrap this thought up, is I am not the right person to make that content, because if I tried to speak to a younger audience, I would give off very strong youth pastor / hello fellow kids energy. I agree with Henry. I do think there's a place for that, especially people who, not even so much the outrage screaming at the camera thing, because I can do that. I think I could pull that off. But the people who speak the memes, who speak the language, who know the slang, the people who are actually in that world and know that language, I think there's definitely plenty of space for them to translate this message. I'm sounding so old right now, but you know what I mean? Like there is room for that, but I'm definitely not the right person to do it because it will come off so insincere and so cringy. And I accept that. That's not me, but it would be nice to see some stuff that's catered more toward, because you're right. Like the easiest way to defend your privacy is to not put that data out there in the first place. So if we can get to kids when they're just old enough to start using the internet and teach them to think about what are you putting out there? What videos are you uploading, pictures, comments, etc., and they can think about that before they start putting stuff out there. It's not going to be perfect, but I think it would go a long way. I'm going to cut that off before I go too long, because the next question, you said, speaking of children and teens, what can they do to increase their own privacy? And you talked about, for example, easy opt-outs in the terms of service says that they only service people who are 18 and older. They won't deal with minors. And you also mentioned in your longer question about things like school-issued Chromebooks. That is a challenge. I did actually speak to a listener who is a minor and was in that same situation. Like, hey, my parents pay for my phone, so I'm at the mercy of whatever phone they get me. A lot of the time parents will, especially for younger kids, parents will say like, I need to know what you're doing online to make sure that you're not being groomed or anything. I think it's kind of the same advice we would give to anybody. Like, for example, if you're living paycheck to paycheck and you're like, I can't afford easy opt-outs, or I can't afford to pay for Proton or things like that, or a voice over IP, I have to use Amazon because I cannot afford the higher price of going somewhere else. It's the same principle. Is like you just have to look for the things you can do. So for example, if you have to use a Chromebook for school, try to only use it for school. And I know that may not be optional or an option for, lower income people. That may be literally the only computer in the house. Put uBlock Origin Lite in the browser. Like it's not as good as full uBlock Origin, but it's something. See if you can install a different browser. Be mindful that the school administrator can still probably see that other browser, but again, it's still protecting you from that fingerprinting online to use something like Firefox or Brave. I know this is kind of a cheating answer, but I would just look for the things you can do. You can still, when you sign up for a service online, you can still fuzz your age a little bit, assuming they're not doing age verification, which they'd probably kick you out anyways at that point, so it doesn't matter. You can still try to get something sent to a friend's house instead of your house. Just look for the little things you can do that help. Take note in the terms of service, like when you use the school Chromebook, there's probably somewhere in the terms of service like, oh, you can request to have your data modified or whatever here. Write that down for later. So when you graduate and turn 18, you can email them and be like, hey, per your terms of service, I want you to delete this stuff. That's something that doesn't get talked about enough.
My only response to this is if you're not 18 yet, I actually don't know what easy opt-outs really do for you, if anything, because most of that data that's collected is going to come from services you probably don't have yet, like DMV stuff, utility bills, car insurance. Like most of the stuff that is the biggest data collection source for these data broker industries are coming from your parents. So you can kind of ride that wave. If I had to go back into my teen years, and this is actually a lot of what I did, I pretty much just prepared myself for when I was an adult. So look at it that way. Like use this time to kind of like, get your password manager together, start planning out, how to do things privately. If you're starting to go to the DMV, feel free to use your parents' address if they're comfortable with that, of course, and then plan a strategy to transition to something else, right? Like when eventually you move out of the house and stuff like that. So just use it as time. There aren't too many concerns when you're not 18 yet, I think, in the privacy world. But you do have a lot of concerns the moment you turn 18. So not that there's no concerns, of course, right? It's not what I'm saying, but I think that the concerns are far greater once you're 18. So use the time to prep.
I did want to mention that real quick is, at least here in the US, between 16 and 18 is when these privacy concerns start to come to light, because that's when your parents will like add you to their insurance. That's when you open your bank account. That's when you get your first job. That's when you start. My cat has opinions wherever he is. Oh, hey, buddy. It's good that you're thinking about this now, but yeah, there's not much you can do, unfortunately.
Yeah, and then you asked about Google merging ChromeOS with Android. Honestly, at least on my end, we talked about this in the main episode. There's like no information about this. So I don't know what's going to happen. Nope, not even the Google people seem to know what's happening, or they're not sharing. So I don't have much info here.
Oddbyte's last question is, what do you think about Android apps like Shizuku and Dhizuku? What are the security trade-offs of these apps, and are they worth it for the benefit of giving some apps more permissions to the core of the device? How do they compare to rooting? If you install them on a security-focused phone, are they making your phone more insecure? First of all, I've never heard of these apps. I don't feel a whole lot of confidence in this app. I don't even know what it does. It just says, let your app use system APIs directly. And then there's like some code you can copy and paste. I don't know. It claims to be open source. We have said many times that open source does not automatically mean it's private or secure. In answer to your question, I would not install this on my phone. I don't think you should install this on your phone. I think it would degrade the security model of the phone. My question is like, what more permissions would you need from the app that needs to get core device access. Like, I don't even know what the purpose of this thing is. Like, what could you possibly need this for?
Seems interesting. I likewise don't know what I would use it for, but I'm not as like if you know you need this for something, then you probably know what it's for. And I don't know what I would use this for myself. But it's a consistently updated GitHub repo. Seems to have quite a lot of contributors. The next question comes from a new user, Esquilax. Do you guys have any recommendations for privacy respecting music streaming services? We've talked about this quite a few times at this point, and sadly, the answer hasn't changed a huge amount. Spotify is probably overall the worst when it comes to privacy, with the benefit that you can run it in any web app using your browser's protections, which includes things like ad blockers, DNS filtering, etc. So you can always use Spotify that way, and you can always just buy a Spotify gift card at your local store and use it with a simple login email. They don't really check and they don't care too much about the information you give them. So you can use Spotify pseudo anonymously. Just know that it's not inherently a very privacy respecting service. Both Nate and I in the past have talked about how Apple's slightly better, but if you do a data request from Apple, you'll see Apple Music is not like Apple's most privacy respecting service in their entire ecosystem. But I don't think many people would argue it's worse than Spotify. And then from there, it's local libraries. It's like using YouTube with an ad blocker, not logged in, or like self-hosting. You can always have your own NAS with your own music library that, you sync remotely. There are several options there. Lately, I just kind of say, just use Apple Music, or you can use Spotify in the web with all the protections I kind of established. And right now I'm always kind of moving back and forth between some services. I have been experimenting more with like Spotify in the web for desktop. But then on mobile, I've been using nothing. So I'm actually just using a free Spotify account as of late, because free Spotify on desktop with an ad blocker is, to me, no different than premium, as someone who's not that picky about my music streaming needs. I would argue it's an unethical way. It's no different than me pirating the songs, is the way I'd put it, though. Like, if I'm blocking ads on Spotify and I'm not paying Spotify money, I'm not giving the artists any money. So what I'm doing is no different than pirating, in a way. So yeah, I'm very conflicted every time I do it. Fortunately, I don't really listen to like music streaming very often in these days. So like it's something I'll do like once a week at this point.
So first off, yeah, like Henry said, the most private option would be just to buy the CD and either rip it straight to your device, keep a backup, or host your own media server. Like that would definitely be the ideal option. Spotify, their privacy policy is pretty bad. They also collect a lot of data about you off platform from other services, which is also why I've seen people online like praising Spotify's algorithm and how good it is. And I'll be honest, like I'm a little annoyed with Apple Music's algorithm. Even now that it's had plenty of time to get used to me and get to know me, it's still like there's an artist named Isaac. He's German. He was in Eurovision last year and he's fantastic. And he put out an EP in January. And I hate to say it, but it was pretty mid, so I didn't save any of the songs. And then I randomly checked his page again like a month ago, and he's put out 3 new songs since then, 2 of which are amazing and high quality like most of his music is. So it's like, really, Apple? Like I skipped 1 EP and you just never show me any of his songs again? There was another Eurovision artist this year, Gabri Ponte, who used to be in Eiffel 65, for those of you who know that song. I saved his Eurovision song because it was catchy. And then because he's a DJ, he puts out a song like every other week. And for months, Apple was showing me every single song he released. And it's like, I don't care. I only liked his 1 song from Eurovision. You need to chill. So Apple's not great compared to Spotify, but Spotify's great because their algorithm is great because they spy on you everywhere, including off platform. It's kind of like the whole Google search thing, which I hear mixed things about these days anyways. One more thing to consider, because Henry was talking about using Spotify privately. Spotify is really sprinting over the line of unethical behavior because they are now AI generating music. They are doing this. They are making AI generated music. They are trying to pretend that it is an actual band, and they are publishing it on Spotify so that they don't have to pay anybody because it's all AI generated. They're not being open about, I mean, they will if you corner them. If you're like, hey, I can't find this band anywhere on the internet, but all of a sudden they're springing up with this like 6 albums in the last 3 months, full length albums that all sound weirdly the same. What's going on? And then they'll be like, oh yeah, this is AI generated music. But nowhere in the description does it say like this band was AI generated. They've got like a name, they've got a picture and everything. At best, their moderation is going to crap because I've read stories about like artists who passed away in the 1980s that all of a sudden an album is getting released onto their Spotify page and their manager and their estate are like, what the fuck is this? And Spotify's like, oh, sorry, that was a moderation error. We should have caught that. And it's like, no, you knew exactly what you were doing, dude. I don't know. I try not to do the whole like you shouldn't tell people what to do thing, but regardless of where you sit on the AI thing, I think Spotify is being real shady lately, and I really encourage you guys to check out whether it's self-hosting, whether it's Deezer, whether it's Apple. Do your research. The New Oil has a blog about how to read a privacy policy, and basically what I look for is what information do we collect and who do we share it with. And I think just looking at those will tell you a lot. We've covered here, they're not perfect, but even the privacy labels in the App Store, those will give you a rough general idea of just like a quick snapshot. So yeah, I would check those. The next one comes from Dark Horse MBA. You said, are there any security or privacy concerns using IPv6? I want to configure IPv6 on my router. This is part of the plan to use IVPN and NextDNS in combination. I would be configuring IPv6 only onto the WAN connection to allow access to secure DNS. Are there inherent risks? I'm not an IPv6 expert. I think Henry knows more than I do, so I'll keep this brief and let him speak from a place of knowing more than I do. My gut reaction is to say, yes, there is a concern, because I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, part of the IPv6 address uses the MAC address of the device. But I think they may have fixed that, because I've heard a lot of people who are very knowledgeable about privacy and security say that they wish we would hurry up and transition to IPv6 already, because it's just better from a networking perspective. My main concern is that it still does not seem to be widely supported. So I think it's something you can enable. I don't know how many issues it'll cause. I don't think there's a problem with enabling it. I think you just may find that it probably won't do as much as you need it to, except in this case where you say, now I can mix IVPN and NextDNS in combination. So I guess that would be a win. But as far as I know, there shouldn't be any major risks. But now I will let Henry say if I'm right or wrong.
It's not something I'm super familiar with. First thing I would say is, yeah, you're more likely, I think, to find compatibility issues before privacy and security issues as of right now, whether it's through your router, whether it's trying to get IVPN to work well over IPv6 on every website, or whether it's to work, like, there's so many like layers here that I think might go wrong along the way. It'll probably work fine. It's just that I would think that would be a bigger concern. We've talked about kind of like the pros and cons of IPv6 versus IP4 in the past. And as far as I can tell, for most people, this falls into the camp of it doesn't really impact the regular person very much. It seems like a lot of just technical trade-offs, and we can like probably go and read like a 100-page forum post about this where people are just getting into the nitty-gritty differences. And the reality is this is not like a huge consideration. Like if you're able to configure IVPN with NextDNS on everybody's devices, whether or not they're using IPv4 versus IPv6 is the most important thing. I would not let the IPv6 aspect hold you back from trying to accomplish what you're trying to do, is what I'm trying to say here.
So real quick, I asked Lumo, because I happen to have it open in another window for unrelated reasons. Like Henry was saying, it seems to largely come down to making sure you configure it correctly. It says that it does include privacy extensions designed to generate temporary random IP addresses to enhance user privacy. These are temporary addresses that change over time. There's a neighbor discovery protocol that, if it is misconfigured, can lead to security risks such as address spoofing or man-in-the-middle attacks. There are security headers such as IPsec, which are supported natively. However, proper configuration is essential. The transition from 4 to 6 introduces complexities and potential security risks. Mechanisms like dual stack, tunneling, and translation can create vulnerabilities, and network scanning. This is obviously a very limited answer, but it sounds to me like any potential concerns would just be configuration. So make sure you know what you're doing and you've got everything configured right. But that kind of goes for like anything that we talk about. If you're going to self-host anything or put the VPN on your router or whatever, like just make sure you get it right. Probably not the end of the world if you get it wrong, but we wouldn't want to lure you into a false sense of security.
David Johnson. 2 general opinions/questions. How do you approach striking a balance between your pursuit of privacy and security with your pursuit of growth? I've had different approaches with this, and this is something that everybody needs to just make a conscious decision about. You asked for opinions, and so I'll go ahead and just share what I've done and kind of my journey. First off, if you do something really good and really impactful, and you resonate with a lot of people, it doesn't matter what your username is. It doesn't matter what name you put out there. People will resonate with it and they will enjoy it. There's other YouTubers out there who don't share their name and they're more popular than we are. They do better than we do. You don't need to have a personality to be successful, at least, in our space. Of course, this is a little bit different when you're actually trying to apply for a job and, be an actual person working for a company. And then this is where it might be a little bit more helpful to have a little bit more of a personal brand. And so what I'm a big proponent of is like, just make a decision. You can be completely off the grid if that's what you want to do. But a nice middle ground for a lot of people is just have a nice public presence. just something that like you can share with loved ones, something you can share with border patrol agents if you're pulled over and you're trying to get into a country. If you listen to our podcast, just plant a flag with basic personal information. And you can even start other projects that have nothing to do with that personal brand that you put up there, but just have a personal brand, plant that flag. And that way, like, your privacy journey doesn't have to hold back your professional journey. You can just say, I don't really use social media. Oh yeah, but I also just run this YouTube channel with 1 million subscribers that nobody knows about, right? That's not been my approach at all. My approach has been, I pretty much, because I shared my face on Techlore really early on, that kind of ended up being blended there, but it is practically what I end up doing in a way, because I don't really have personal social media. It is kind of the flag that I've planted for myself. It's just a bit more public facing than I would prefer it to be. And so if I could change something, maybe I would try to do Techlore like not tied to me specifically, but then I would still plant, a couple social media accounts just for myself, just so I have a public presence, like maybe just a LinkedIn account, and then like, I don't know, maybe a Twitter or something that I go ahead and just post organically to for like 2 months, and then I never touch it again. And I just have like a good solid like 2-month history there. So that way it just looks somewhat legit and like I kind of abandoned it. So that's my relationship with it. But the most important thing is just to make an intentional decision based on your values and what you're trying to achieve in the world. I think it's fully acceptable for you to just want to go completely offline, not have any web presence, and that you're okay with the consequences that brings. And I think it's fully acceptable to try to have somewhat of a career growth potential with your public presence while just having some privacy in other areas of your life. So just pick and choose what's best for you.
Admittedly, it was a little hard to parse this question and understand exactly what you were going for, because you kind of touched on a lot of different things. Like you mentioned that, for example, like super famous rich people kind of need to go hard with their privacy and trying to buy these houses that are anonymous and don't show up in the public record, but also they have a lot of money, so they can pay people like Michael Basil to go do that. They don't have to sit there and read all his books themselves. So I think it's really, what are you going for? Like, one thing Henry and I try to encourage people is that you don't have to make privacy your life. We're really passionate about this, so we're cool with spending a lot of time reading the headlines and doing surveillance report and YouTube videos. But most people don't want to do that. Most people trying to keep this short, but I've shared before that one of the most frustrating questions I get is when I meet new people and I talk about privacy and they go, so what do you do for your privacy? And what they're really asking is, what app can I download that I just don't have to think about it again? And it's like, well, that's not how any of this works. And so I think for the average person, there's some pretty universal things like using a password manager, switching to a privacy respecting browser, trying to use encryption when you can. But then there's also really specific things like, do you want to take your information off the internet, which I think everybody should, but for some people, it's a bigger priority than others. And, we've talked before about how that can be a double-edged sword. Henry's right. Like, if you use a data removal service and all your information goes off the internet, there's a good possibility the only thing that's going to show up when somebody Googles you is like your ex from 5 years ago talking shit about you on Tumblr. So it could be a good idea, depending on the kind of field you're going into, to kind of make like your own blog where you post thoughts about your job field. Henry pointed out it also depends on your field. Like I don't see the point of LinkedIn. I forget it exists 90% of the time, but I've also met people who live and die by LinkedIn. And they're like, if you don't have a LinkedIn in my job industry, you can't get a job, period. So it really depends on what's needed in your job. I think for the average person that we're targeting with our content that we're trying to speak to, our encouragement is to integrate privacy in their life into a way where it's non-obtrusive. So there is the initial switching cost of, you delete, in a perfect world, you delete Facebook, you start using password managers, you switch browsers, you maybe switch operating systems, or you take a day to sit down and go through your settings. And if my cat keeps yelling, I'm going to get so mad. But the goal is that once they get past that initial switching cost and they've made these changes in their lives, at that point, it's kind of almost on autopilot. Like, we still want people to, watch the podcast and keep up with any major changes. Like, we talk about new products going away, new laws. That's kind of why we do the podcast, is that way people don't have to spend 40 hours a week trying to read every single headline. But in the long run, once they get the initial work out of the way, their life should kind of move on as normal. They should still be able to go to these conferences, get these certifications. Like I said, maybe if you want to spin up a blog and post some thoughts and try to become a thought leader in the space or whatever, it's really up to you and what you need. But ideally, and this is something I've been harping on a lot lately, is privacy nothing should really consume your life like that. Like, it's really important to be a well-balanced person who has other hobbies and other interests and good relationships and, working out if that's your thing. Like, just try to be balanced and make time for everything. But in answer to your actual question, how do we approach striking that balance? I think Henry said this. It's just it's being intentional. It's recognizing I'm spending too much work. I want to, every night, an hour before bed, I'm going to log off the computer and read a book or play a video game or watch TV, or, I'm going to wake up every morning and go to the gym, or, whatever it is. Like, just making that intentional. What do you want out of life and how can you get there?
Yeah. I mean, we care about you guys as listeners, and we want you all to be as private as you need to be to still have a sustainable, happy life. And I don't think that just caring about privacy all day, every day will make you happy. It's very well established, it's well researched that people who are happy have strong relationships. They move, they get outside, they have a network of people that they can rely on. They don't just focus on one thing. They have multiple things to engage with and keep themselves occupied mentally, physically. So we're not incentivized to say this. I'm incentivized to tell you, if you don't care about privacy, you're gonna blow up and like your whole life's gonna end, and and fear monger and get a ton of YouTube clicks, because that is what works. And we see some YouTube channels who do that. And I'm here to tell you that it's about trying to find a balance with your life and trying to make things sustainable so that you can actually, ironically, you'll actually care about privacy longer. You're going to be involved in this space for a lot longer. We have listeners, and I get comments from people who have been around since like 2017, 2016. They've been following Techlore/surveillance support now for like 10 years. And I don't think they'd be able to do that if they didn't find a good, healthy relationship with privacy that still allowed them to live the life they want to live. It's important stuff to find that balance.
It's a marathon, not a sprint. Why do you think there is such a disparity between tech law, such as IT services, software, hardware, data privacy, and food law? So in other words, the example you gave, how come food is so heavily regulated where there's different laws about, Henry and I have talked about this, you can go to the store and feel relatively confident that almost anything you buy at the store will not immediately kill you because it's poisoned or spoiled or anything. And I actually do have an answer to this. I think the reason is just recency. The term snake oil exists for a reason, because back many, many years ago, decades ago, there was no food regulation. And, people would constantly buy, like, they'd go to the store and they think they're getting beef, but it's actually got horse meat in it. Or, they would get food that was spoiled or, was poisoned. Like, literally look up old timey remedies. In addition to completely insane things like cocaine and heroin, they would contain, oh my God, I don't even want to say some of it. Like, it's gross. Like, some of the stuff they would put in this stuff was insane and gross. And the reason food is safe now is because we have organizations who have made food safer, namely the FDA. And you could argue if the FDA is still effective or not, but there is definitely at least a couple decade window where they were doing fantastic work. To bring that back to tech, I actually hear this a lot in the context of like fake news and disinformation nowadays. We had this same problem with the printing press and journalism. When the printing press came along, all of a sudden it was called yellow journalism. There were all these newspapers printing these sensational, outlandish stories that were completely not true and made up, but they were just trying to get clicks. Eventually, the courts caught up with this stuff and they said, you can't do that. That's slander. That is not protected speech because it is causing harm on a mass scale, this, that, and the other. And over time, the news got refined and got more reliable. Now we're entering a new phase where we have all this new technology like blogs and YouTube and AI and this and that and the other. And I think the law simply hasn't caught up yet. And it's unfortunate. It sucks to be living in that painful period. But I think veteran listeners know I am not a techno optimist necessarily. So I don't mean this in like a rosy red kind of way. I think in a long enough timeline, we will get laws that will help rein some of this stuff in. Will it be effective? I don't know, because it certainly feels like technology is moving faster than the laws can keep up. And by the time those laws come in, something new may be going on. Lawmakers don't understand this stuff. So there's a possibility that the laws they pass are going to be largely influenced by lobbyists and interest groups, or just won't be effective because, we talked about age verification this week. Somebody sent me this link after we recorded, of course, but there was a story about how Discord users were able to bypass age verification by using screenshots from a video game. So like, it's these lawmakers that are arguably trying to do something in good faith, but they're just going for the easiest Band-Aid solution that makes sense to them without realizing how not good it is. So I don't know if those laws will be perfect, but I do think in time laws will start to catch up, and there will be a balance to strike there between not stifling innovation and free speech and things like that, but also finding tools that are actually effective and do what they should do. So yeah, it's just, I think that's the answer, is we're still technically in the very, very early days of this technology, and the laws just haven't caught up yet.
I don't have anything really more to add except one thing, which is keep in mind that the things that we have always had, just because they've existed historically doesn't mean they will in the future. So this is something that needs to be continually fought for. Food is being very heavily attacked right now, especially in the US, by certain individuals who think things like drinking unpasteurized milk are a good idea, which I have no issue saying it's not a good idea, so please don't do it. Just keep in mind that things that are currently in place that are overall safeguards, that are some of the most impressive feats we've pulled off as human beings, are consistently attacked and aren't guaranteed in the next 10, 20 years, right? But yeah, I just want to really put that out there because, maybe we will find some success in the future with like tech law and really making the progress that we want to see there. But just because we make that progress doesn't mean that things can't devolve. So just keep that in mind in the coming years. Last question is from XMR Chat, which for those who don't know is a place where you can ask a question. You don't need to join a Patreon. You don't need to join anything. All you do is leave as much Monero as you want when you leave your question. And it's a way for you to just do it one-off and give us no personal information. The only thing we know is whatever someone puts in their question and their username that they put, which what a lot of times is anonymous, is what a lot of people put.
Yeah, a lot of people put like a non or something.
But this person put, love your content, so thank you very much. And they said, new to Graphene OS, I can't figure out how to specify a device-wide DNS server of my choice, preferably using DOH or DOT. And only some requests like connectivity checks are sent to my DNS server. Any idea or alternative to the built-in settings? Yeah, I've only ever done custom DNS on Android via just the built-in settings module for, I think it uses DOT. If you really want to do this, you can try to find, I'm pretty sure Rethink DNS would be a pretty solid solution for you. Something that's going to use the VPN slot on your device and change the DNS server to be what you want to be. My assumption is AdGuard on Android would do this as well. But my guess is based on like community feedback and what people use in our community, Rethink DNS is probably going to be your best bet. And I think there's ways to use Rethink DNS with another VPN provider, so you can still have like a VPN provider with a custom DNS server as well. That's my best guess if I was to like start troubleshooting this on my end with your configuration.
First and foremost, I'm sure this goes without saying, but just so that it's said, this isn't just Graphene, but if you have any specific service-specific question, we highly encourage you to go to their community and support channels first. So in the case of Graphene, they have a matrix room, they have a forum. I would start there because I can't speak to how to do this on Graphene specifically. I have never really used the settings to do device-wide DNS. I typically don't mess with DNS much at all, to be honest, because I'm usually using a VPN on my device and I'm perfectly content with the tracking and ad blocking that they offer. The ones we use like iVPN and Mullvad and Proton, I think it's good enough for my purposes. I just go into the settings and I make sure that, is enabled to like, hey, block ads and trackers and stuff. If the settings aren't working for some reason, like Henry was saying, you can use the VPN and try to do a custom DNS in the VPN app. If that's not working either, then yeah, I would definitely look into the actual app. Like AdGuard is one I've used. You can download NextDNS, Rethink, basically that. If the settings aren't working and you can't get any help on the official channels, VPN with custom DNS or just a DNS app directly would be my recommendation. And that goes for any device, really. So those were our questions this week. We were talking about how to avoid Amazon, which music streaming service is the most privacy respecting. I'd make a good blog post if I ever have time to write one of those again. And how we balance our privacy lifestyle with our general goals and growth in life, and many, many more questions. A lot of questions the last couple weeks. Thank you guys so much for supporting us, for engaging with us, asking really good questions, being part of our community. If you are not already on Patreon, you can join at patreon.com/surveillancepod. For $5 a month or more, you get to ask us these questions. You also get to join our Signal group. For $10 or more a month, you get a longer version of the podcast where we have, first of all, no sponsor segment, and second, we have a lot more analysis. It's a lot more like this, or like the headline story in the podcast. We always leave that unedited so you guys can see kind of what the rest of it would be like in the patron section. And of course, if you don't care about any of those perks, but you just want to support us in a privacy respecting way, we do have xmrchat.com/surveillancepod. You don't have to ask a question if you don't want to. Sometimes people just leave a tip and they say, hey, thanks for keep up the great work or whatever. And, we really appreciate all that support. So thank you again for the questions. Thank you again for watching. And we will see you this coming week with more privacy news.